Welcome to this Killick Explains Finance video. This week I want to take a look at an important topic, financial security, and ask the question, can we measure it? Now, financial security varies from person to person. What is secure for one person in terms of an amount won't be for another. Leaving that to one side, if you're busy saving and investing, how do you check how you're doing? Because that's an important part of the motivation to keep going. So let's have a look. The background is this. Why are we investing? Why are we saving? Why are we putting money aside? Well, there are 4 reasons that I've covered in other videos. I want to focus on one in particular here, and that is security. Are there ways to measure it? Yes, there are. Lots, actually. And can you keep track on where you are relative to where you were, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and so on? Okay, so financial security matters to most of us. A few background points. How can you measure it? I reckon there are 5 ways to do it. Now, there are clearly more than 5, and not all 5 will apply to everybody that's watching this video, but a selection of them are quite a useful way to track how you're getting on. So the tests. Now, there are 5, as I mentioned, not all will apply to everybody. Net worth is 1, debt to income is the 2nd, more coming up on each one in a moment. Rainy day cover is the 3rd, and I mentioned that before. Independence ratio sounds very grand, but I'll give you a snapshot on what that is in a moment. And the financial stress level. Now, 4 of those are what I call hard tests, and 1 is kind of fluffier. There are more, and do email me at the end if you'd like to know what they are, and also accept that not all of them will apply to you. So let's take a look at each in turn. Now, net worth, what is that? Well, I mentioned it elsewhere. It's our assets minus our liabilities. It's like a personal balance sheet. If you imagine listing your assets, which might include house, personal possessions, car, and so on, deduct your liabilities, mortgages, personal loans, credit card debt, you get to a net worth figure, which is hopefully positive. In the early stages of life, it might be negative if you're paying back loans, for example, but as you move through life, hopefully it gets positive, and then more so as you head through middle life and so on. So it should increase over time or get less negative if it starts as a negative number. And you need to regularly check the amount and how much it has grown. So in other words, we're accumulating assets, hopefully net assets over our lifetime up to a point where we hit peak savings, hopefully when we're probably still working full time, and then we de-accumulate the other side. Maybe we're working less, fewer days of the week if you like, maybe we're not working at all. But it's basically working out where that peak savings point will occur, when the de-accumulation phase begins, and also recognising that we may need to use our assets to fund our income and lifestyle later on. The old-fashioned split between, well, that's my capital and that's my income may not work, depending on how much income you need during that de-accumulation phase. And that's something to bear in mind. So keeping track on net worth all the way through life is quite important. Debt to income is number 2. Now, if you haven't got any debt, this obviously won't matter to you, but lots of people do in the form of mortgages, personal loans, and so on. So monthly debt repayments as a percentage of income is one way to do it. Now, I'm covering a lot of ground in a short distance here, so if you want more detail, ping me at the end. But that's the bones of the calculation. The lower the better. So a bit like a company, the lower, in theory, its gearing, the better. And the higher its interest cover, the better. So the same view, you want ideally your monthly debt to not be absorbing too much of your income, and that can influence ultimately the level of it, your ability both to borrow and negotiate a decent rate. Okay, so it is quite important. And you might say, well, in a low interest rate environment, does that matter? But actually it does. Some of the banks are now publishing overdraft rates of 40%. So whilst your mortgage rate might be a lot lower than that, personal loans, overdrafts and so on can be expensive. Number 3, rainy day cover. Now, there are several ways to look at this. A fund of 3 to 6 months of spending is what we tend to set aside in cash as a reserve. Another way to look at it is, if you lost your job tomorrow, pretty gloomy assumption, how long could you keep going until you'd need to find another one? In other words, how many months of your regular spending have you got available to cover a tough patch? So that's important. It needs to be liquid, that fund, and separate from your long-term lifetime savings. We're not going to use our investment portfolio as a kind of cash point machine. No. And do I have any crisis insurance on top? Now, not everybody needs every type of insurance. There are insurances out there, life assurance, critical illness cover and so on. Some more relevant to others, but essentially, how much crisis insurance do I need versus how much have I got? And when was the last time I checked I was getting a good deal? Also important. Then there's the independence ratio, grand sounding beast. I'm going to cover it in quick time here, but basically there is more detail behind it. So what do we got? We're looking at what percentage of your cost of living could you cover from income generated by your assets. Now, the easiest way to proceed on this is by way of an example. It's about financial freedom, independence, as well as security, this one. The higher the better, example coming up, and the calculation is only an estimate. I'm going to use a really simple calculation, as some of you will spot. There is more detail to support a live one, but you'll get the idea of what it's trying to show. Now, a bit more work required with this one. So you earn £50,000, let's say, and save 20% of it per year. I'm not going to worry about tax rates and so on for this simple example. So you're good, you're saving 20% per year, pretty punchy total. So you've also got rental income, so you've set up a property asset of £10,000 a year, and you've got £150,000 of investments, lucky you, generating around 4% a year. That is not guaranteed, it's a pure assumption for this example. Where would that leave you? Well, your non-working income on that basis is around £16,000. You've got £10,000 coming from the property, and you've got investments of £150,000 generating 4% a year. So you've got £16,000. But if you think about it, if you were to stop work, you're looking to replace £40,000. Why 40,000? Well, because presumably at that point I wouldn't need to save. I'd have stopped, getting up to my peak savings, if you like. So we're looking to replace 40 in effect, and therefore, very simply, your financial independence ratio is the 16 you've got coming in over the 40 you need, or 40%. Okay, lots of detail missing there. You probably get the idea. The higher that is, the better in financial security terms. And then finally, the squodgy one, the softer one, financial stress levels. Now, this might sound a little bit bland what I'm about to say, but it is important. Basically, it's all right while doing the numbers, but how do you feel about them? In other words, how often do you worry about your financial situation? There's no right answer here. Is the frequency rising or falling? And what's behind that? And what are the solutions? Now, two, essentially, either change your financial strategy, easy for me to say, or manage down your stress levels, okay? Now, easy for me to say. What do I mean by that? Well, lots of parents where I live are angsting about do they send their kids to private school or not? Does that mean that, for example, one of them needs to go back to full-time work in order to pay for it? Stress levels start to rise. So to be honest, easy for me to say, some of those people need to sit down and have an honest conversation. Do we really want both of us committed to working full-time for the next 20 years to cover private school fees, or is there another way we could educate our children, setting aside peer pressure, setting aside where granddad went to school, and so on? In other words, are you prepared to try and lock down your costs to reduce financial stress, or are you not, in which case you've got to find a way to manage the higher levels of stress that come with those decisions. Okay, to sum up, nice little phrase from Peter Drucker. In other words, what we're suggesting there is try and change what you control, manage what you don't, and most importantly, understand the difference between those two things. That is at the root of managing financial stress. Loads of detail missing, but you get the very basic message. Okay, I've covered a lot of ground. 5 tests very quickly. There's an email address to ping any more questions. And if you want to find out a bit more about some of the things I mentioned, net asset tests, rainy day cover, killick.com/learn. And down here, the Investing Principles tab.